What is it like to live with an invisible condition that causes chronic pain? And how do you navigate your home life and work when there is no cure for this condition? Wunmi Bakare, she, her, tells us about growing up with sickle cell disease and undergoing a stem cell transplant for treatment. She shares her passion for providing support and building community through her organization, Sickle Cell Prodigy. In recognition of Black History Month, let's get started. Welcome, Wumi, and I am so grateful to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Figure we'll just dive right into it.
Yep.
You were diagnosed with the most severe type of sickle cell disease, a hemoglobin SS, at 18 months old, and you had a stem cell transplant in 2019 as part of an NIH National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute clinical trial.
Yes.
That's really taking quite a lot and distilling it down into one sentence. But we'll be, chatting and unpacking that. I think just starting out, can you share with us what it's like living with sickle cell disease on a day-to-day basis?
So for me, sickle cell, I always say, is the rock on which I've built my perfectly imperfect life. And by that, I just mean my diagnosis informed everything I love about myself and everything I don't really love about myself. But I think sickle cell for me as a child was quite cumbersome. I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria, born and raised. And so for the earlier part of my life into my adolescence, I had to navigate a disease that was surrounded by social stigma, which means my close family knew, but I refrained from telling classmates and teachers because I didn't want to be othered. I didn't want to be treated differently. Sickle cell, because it is a blood disease that impacts the red blood cells, I had many bouts of vaso-occlusive crises that would put me in the hospital. I remember my very first surgery was at the age of 7. And I just remember being really sick at the time, running a fever. Initially, we thought it was malaria because, again, Nigeria is a third world country that's significantly impacted by malaria. But then it turned out that I had something called osteomyelitis. I caught an infection called salmonella through one of our delicacies, which we call suya. And it started to, the infection was in both of my arms and it started to kind of cause holes in my
Oh my
bones.
gosh.
And so I had to have surgery, bilateral arm surgery to kind of scrape the degenerated bone out. And then I was put on vaccines to make sure that I didn't have a repeat of that salmonella infection again. So I just
Mhm.
remember being 7 years old, being pulled out of school and being in the hospital for 3 months, which I
Wow.
think for any 7-year-old, that is a rude awakening of when you realize, I think I'm a little different from the other kids because it's not just a nasty flu and then I'm back to school. And then I just also remember having a lot of blood transfusions
Mhm.
because for sickle cell disease, oftentimes you don't just treat sickle cell with hydration and pain medication. Oftentimes the patient needs normal red blood cells through blood transfusion that will help to kind of dilute the sickled cells that are inside the body. And so over the course of my life living with sickle cell disease, I can say I've had well over 50 blood transfusions. And so now I always say the interesting thing is on the other side of a stem cell transplant, I now have iron overload because of so many blood transfusions growing up with sickle cell disease. So sickle cell was challenging in some ways because it limited what I could do. I couldn't participate in sports. So I always tell people I don't have the sports DNA. But I instead dedicated kind of a lot of my time to just like studying and staying on top of things because of the unpredictability of sickle cell
Mm.
disease. So life was it had its ups and downs, but now that I'm an adult, I wouldn't change anything because sickle cell informed like my empathy, my tenacity, and my resilience, which are things I value most when I think of kind of who
Mhm.
I am and how I show up in the world.
Mhm. Mhm. And so you mentioned you had sickle cell and it was diagnosed around 18 months or, younger in life, but because of that, when you had other things going on, like you're talking about with the salmonella and other types of health issues, sometimes it's hard to tell, is this the sickle cell anemia or is this something else? And
Yes. And with sickle cell disease, a lot of things are triggers for us, right?
okay.
So for someone else, the storm that just happened recently wouldn't trigger anything, right? It's just a storm. You stay at home, you'll be okay. For sickle cell patients, it significantly impacts the increase in our vaso-occlusive crisis symptoms. So for us, weather, altitude, stress, infection, those are some of the things that many sickle cell patients deal with that tend to trigger a vaso-occlusive crisis that oftentimes puts us in the hospital.
Mhm. And tell us a little bit more about this crisis. Like, kind of what does that involve? What goes along with it?
Okay. So usually a crisis, I want to say almost every sickle cell patient, the older you get, you can almost predict when a crisis is
Hmm.
coming on. And usually it starts with pain, chronic pain. So if you think about it this way, of the human body, if in your blood vessels you have sickled red blood cells that are sickling and stuck together, it's blocking blood flow. So if you think about a sickle cell crisis, think of it happening in various parts of the body. So oftentimes for me, my pain would always start where I had my surgery, which is both arms. Then usually I'll have it in my lower back. And so usually the way I know when a sickle cell crisis is coming on is usually days before I'll be extremely fatigued. Going to take a shower will feel like someone is asking me to run a marathon. Sometimes it might, for me, I don't know why my vaso-occlusive crisis decided it wanted to show up at like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning, where everywhere is closed and it's really dangerous to go outside. But for some reason, when my body was calm, is when the pain would kind of exacerbate. So for most patients, you're dealing with excruciating pain, and some people describe it as like shards of glass kind of flowing through your blood vessels. It's excruciating in the sense that it's not like a thumping pain or pain that's triggered by the sensation of touch. You can feel it internally where it feels, for me, it always felt like someone took a baseball bat and was just hitting a certain bone a million times. Other times it would feel like, you know how like an anaconda or a viper snake wraps itself around the body and tightens?
Right.
Sometimes it would feel like a tightening. So it's an excruciating pain that for the person going through it, there's a lot of tears, a lot of screams, a lot of growls, but that's the only way that we can express pain. And sometimes letting out those weird noises kind of calms our nervous systems down. But it's really it's really an undescribable pain. And many providers have said it's worse than the pain of childbirth.
Wow.
That's how bad it is. I have a lot of friends who've had children and they're like, I would have 5 more kids. But a sickle cell crisis to me feels never ending.
Mhm. And so you mentioned you talk a lot about kind of the pain and how significant that can be during a crisis, but you also mentioned something too about, like, going to take a shower felt very heavy or exhausting, so it sounds like it also affects your energy
Yes, it does.
and potentially will affect, I mean, like you mentioned, like, just your routines and your day to day, so but it's challenging because it's one that others may not see, right? The chronic pain, and then for those that aren't familiar, basically with sickle cell, our hemoglobin is what carries oxygen around our body, and they're kind of, I don't know, dinner plate, frisbee shaped, kind of flat discs, and then in sickle cell, they're curved.
Yes.
And so my understanding is with like hemoglobin SS, that means there's even more of the hemoglobin, more significant numbers are sickled. So some may
Yes.
be sickled, some not. But when you have those two S's, that means even more are sickled. I guess, what does like a typical good day look like with sickle cell as opposed to some of these hard days when you're in crisis?
A good day with sickle cell for me was fatigue that I could power through. With sickle cell disease, based off your, explanations, again, because the cells are shaped like a banana, like a crescent C, it's not carrying enough oxygen. So usually like a normal woman's hemoglobin level will usually sit at like 16, between 10 and 16. For sickle cell patients, sometimes we sit between a 6 and a 9. So think of your energy level as someone who doesn't have sickle cell disease and cut it by half. When you run
Right.
a marathon and you're like winded, that's how we feel all the time. That's a sense of normal for us. So a good day with sickle cell disease for me was always pain, but pain that on a scale of 1 to 10 was like a 2 or 3. So for me, my definition and my categorization of pain differs very
Right.
distinctly from someone else who doesn't, because all I've known is living with pain day to day. And even on good days, I would feel fatigued, but not overly so where I can't get out of bed. Usually I can do things, I just might need to pace myself differently. Those were good days for me. But I think even with those good days, there would be moments where I could tell that I just needed to take it a little bit easy. And I think
Right.
every sickle cell patient, both male and female, can attest to those kind of in between days, which we define as good days for us.
Mhm. And like you said, your background or kind of baseline threshold of pain is different than somebody without sickle cells.
Yes, most
So,
certainly.
even on a good day, there's still that underlying and also being aware of not getting too tired or not overexerting.
Yes.
You had the transplant in 2019. So can you tell us a bit more about what was involved with the transplant and how that changed or impacted your sickle cell anemia?
Sure. So I do want to share a bit of context as to why I made the decision to explore a transformative therapy like a stem cell transplant. And that was really because sickle cell is a debilitating but also progressive chronic illness. And so the older you get, the worse your symptoms become because there is organ damage, there's bone loss, there are other issues and symptoms that are exacerbated when you have sickle cell disease. And so for me, I was in my late 20s. I had come to Seattle, Washington, which is where I live, to visit my brother on what was supposed to be a 2-week vacation. And from the flight from Lagos to Seattle, I had a crisis. I'm thinking this is just another crisis, no big deal. As soon as I land in Seattle, the ambulance takes me to the hospital. And I go in thinking, tops, I'd be here 7 days. Fast forward 6 weeks, I looked like I was 3 months pregnant. My eyes were severely jaundiced. My urine was the color of Coca-Cola. And my belly was significantly distended. And the doctors couldn't pinpoint what was going on. And after about a month of further testing, we found out I had something called Mycobacterium avium complex. It's called MAC. If you Google it and research it, you notice that the people that tend to have it are either people with hepatitis or AIDS. I had caught it and it had started in kind of my lungs and my kidneys and very quickly split to my bloodstream because I have a port placement on my chest. That's how I get IV access.
Okay.
And so with MAC, it takes 24 months to treat. So I was in the hospital for 2 years. And I
Wow.
always say those were very dark periods, and this was like 2015, 2016. And my family often says, we saw you more in the hospital than we did at home. Like my longest stint at home would be like 5 days, and then I'm back in there. And so because I was critically ill and all of my organs were starting to malfunction, I had to have my gallbladder removed. I got to a place where the standard of care treatment for sickle cell disease wasn't doing me any good. I had been on it for 12 years, hydroxyurea, and I I hadn't reaped the benefits in the way that my peers who also have sickle cell have been able to reap the benefits. And I got to a point where I said, God, I don't want to live past 30 with sickle cell disease. So either you're going to take me out and I'm okay with that, or I need to find another solution. And then I took a deep dive into researching curative therapies for sickle cell disease and stumbled upon transplant. Made the trip to the NIH, met with the team of doctors there, and they told me what my options are. I could either go my brother being my donor, my parents being a half match donor, or I could pursue gene therapy. At the time, gene therapy was so new that I was
Yeah.
like, I don't know if I want to take that risk. So I was really lucky that my brother was a 94% match and ended up being my donor. But I offer that context because I do recognize that even in sharing my story, that's not everyone's lived experience in reality. There are some patients who they're happy on the standard of care treatment. But for me, I saw myself getting worse. I didn't like my quality of life at the time. My close friends were my nurses and the techs. I didn't have friends. I didn't go out. And so I just couldn't see a world where I would continue to live like that and be happy. And so the stem cell transplant process is really rigorous. I often say it takes you away from home. For me, it took me away from Seattle for 6 months because before you embark on that process, you're going to go through conditioning, which is chemotherapy and radiation. And before you do that, as a woman, I'm unmarried. And so the question then becomes, do you want to have children?
Mhm.
My answer was, I can't see myself having a life without a family and kids in it. And so you have to go through IVF and fertility preservation as a way to guarantee that you will be able to have children on the other side of these treatments because it takes a huge toll on the body. So for the transplant process, they stopped the standard of care treatment, hydroxyurea, that I was on, and managed to make sure I didn't have crises with apheresis and blood transfusions. So they would basically bleed me out through one hand and then replace the blood that was depleted with normal red blood cells. So I went through all of those stages before getting to my day 0, which is transplant day, which is the day I got my brother's donor stem cells. And for me, I always say that's my rebirth day because it was the day my life changed in ways I didn't even think was possible. And so now I live my life kind of on the other side of sickle cell disease, but still navigating a lot of the major complications that sickle cell had caused, but they're not going to magically go away just because I've had transplant.
Right. I mean, that's amazing in one that they're able to do that, but then two, you having to navigate all these other things that come along with that. So it's not just making a decision like you talked about with okay, we're going to do a stem cell transplant. It's then thinking about do you want kids someday and how do you want to handle that? And then I think one thing that folks that haven't gone through this don't realize is stem cell transplant. That's also something that we do. I'm in the cancer world. We do that in cancer world for cancer treatment, but it does involve suppressing like your immune system. Like you said, the chemo, the radiation, kind of doing that. So you've done a whole workup before you've even gotten to the point of being able to actually do the transplant.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think most people, when they hear of a transplant, I think most people think of it as like you know how you have like an organ transplant? Like
Mm,
it's just like a without realizing that no, you're wiping my entire immune system. And that comes with late effects outside of what the media portrays of like the side effects of chemo, which is like no hair and
mhm,
losing a sense of like an appetite. No, it also comes with chemo brain, which impacts kind of your cognitive function as well. It comes with insomnia. It comes with
mhm,
changes in your kind of GI tract and, meals and having to kind of reconfigure your own nutrition to figure out
mhm.
what your body can tolerate after and what it can't really.
Right.
Yeah. So it's a
Yeah.
really tedious process, but I always say I would do it all over again for the life I have
Mhm.
now. Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely it's a major medical procedure. So like you said, some folks are on treatment, they're doing okay, or they kind of weigh transplant versus what they're currently doing. And so for some people, it's worth it to do the transplant. For others, they're like, meh, not right
Exactly.
now, not this time. You mentioned that it had a significant impact on your life post-transplant. So what were some of the things that you noticed after your transplant?
I think one of the first things for me was the fatigue. I didn't feel as tired. And the real determinant factor was the year I had my transplant, my nephew was born. And so I always make a weird joke that he's older than me because he was born like 3 months before my actual transplant. But, playing with like a toddler, a boy toddler who also really loves sports requires
Mhm.
a lot of like stamina. And so like I would play football with him and I was just noticed that like I don't feel as winded, and those are really big fears of mine that I had when my brother was starting to have kids of like, I'm gonna be a no-show aunt who makes plans and can't make it. And so to be able to like be active with him, the fatigue going away was one of I think the purest form of joy I've ever felt in my life before of not feeling so drained. And then I think the second thing for me was for the first time in my life, I didn't live on edge, meaning every day with sickle cell, you just don't know. You don't know if that pain in your lower back is the one that will put you in hospital for a couple of days. And I think there was a joy in knowing that like I'm dealing with pain and to my in my body it feels like a vaso-occlusive crisis, but my providers are telling me no, it's not a crisis it's happening. It's just the chronic pain that you've experienced for years, and so all your nerves and your muscles are taking time to kind of recover. So the fact that I knew that the pain I was experiencing wouldn't put me in the hospital gave me a sense of comfort and a way to plan my life in the way that I never had before. Everything with
Mhm.
sickle cell felt like I had to, and I always gender my sickle cell as like a her. It's almost like all the time with sickle cell, it was like almost like her and I always had to have a chat like, we're dating this guy now. I need you not to pull, no, let's not do this. It
Right.
always felt like it was a conversation starter, but like now I was able to like make plans and feel like I'm not going to end up in the hospital tonight. I'm going to go into water and it's not going to put me in the hospital. I'm going to be able to get on this flight without oxygen and not having to be on a wheelchair and being wheeled around the airport. And when I land at my destination, the first thing I Google is not going to be an ER. Which for
Mhm.
me, I always make this interesting joke that like I've been to like 3 different continents and received care around the world.
Mhm.
Everywhere I go, the first thing I research is where's the closest ER? Because for certain, I
Mhm.
always fall sick in another country. Yeah,
Mhm. Mhm. Well, and I think about it, it's not just like you mentioned, like the stamina, the physical load, it's that mental load of having to figure out what's my plan B, my plan C, my plan D, where's the nearest ER, these types of contingency plans if something should happen and things come up.
for sure.
You talk about your family, and it sounds like you're close with your family, whether you're close physically or you're traveling back and forth. Is there things that your family did to support you or that you felt even maybe from friends in the community that felt most helpful?
I think I'm very blessed that I come from a small but close knit family. It's just 2 of us. Literally, I always say, if my brother wasn't a match, I'd be screwed because he's the only sibling I have. But my family was supportive in the sense that my mom was my primary caregiver, and you are not even eligible for these treatments if you don't have someone in your life, whether that be a spouse or a colleague or a parent that can basically be there with you for 6 months, helping you do a lot of the heavy lifting when you can't. And so I was very, very grateful that my mom was able to do that. And my brother and my dad were backups for her when she needed time. Cause I always say like caregiver burnout is real. Like
Yeah.
sometimes the caregiver often falls sick in caring for someone they loved because there's the emotional, there's the mental, and there's the physical toll of caring for
Mhm.
a loved one. And so for me, one of the things that they did that was I will forever be grateful for is communicating with everyone else. So during my transplant,
Mhm.
I knew I would go through a lot of changes, losing my hair, losing weight, getting darker. And so I stayed off social media. I didn't want to see anyone's highlight reel and feel like, well, look at my life. This is what I'm doing.
Mhm.
And so my family was very good about conveying the updates to friends, family, and colleagues in a way that kept me safe, where I didn't need to over explain myself, but gave people enough to know that I was doing okay. And I
Mhm.
will forever be grateful to them for that. And then even like coming back to Seattle, the adjustment was hard for my family because as you remember, we had a pandemic
Yeah.
in 2020 and
Yeah.
I had a brand spanking new immune system and I was wearing masks before masks became a thing. And so like
Mhm.
during the pandemic, having to like wipe down all of my packages and put notes on the door so the UPS or delivery guys could make sure that like they too were also helping to sanitize everything so I'm not in proximity to infection. That was really, really, really helpful at a time
Mhm.
that felt scary for I think the world, including myself.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in addition to the fact, like you said, I've got a brand new immune system right now. And it's like, what are the chances this is happening with the global pandemic?
Yeah.
And were your parents back in Nigeria when you come back, I guess, after some time to live in Seattle?
So, no, when
Mhm.
I came and I was sick, the first year was when we realized how difficult my health had become. And
Mm.
so my mom made the decision to put her business on hold and come to the US to be here to support me because at the
Okay.
time my brother had just gotten engaged and they were looking at moving in together and we didn't want to be a
Mhm.
burden to them. So my
Mhm.
mom came, and then a few months later, my dad came as well. So I always say because of me, they're both here now.
Yes.
But it's been a blessing because it's been a blessing primarily to my brother because now that he has kids, we're close enough
Yeah.
where we can help with childcare
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It is again just it's a major procedure, but then also being able to have that support and it can be tricky when you live in different countries or
For
even
sure.
honestly different states. Mhm. One of the things with sickle cell that I don't know if folks not in the genetic science world understand is that it's sort of seen as what's called like an invisible illness. It's something where um, I think because it is like chronic pain, it is fatigue, there's not necessarily something that you can look at and see immediately saying, oh, this person has this condition. Have there been times where you have experienced like this misunderstanding or people, I mean, even getting judgmental or jerky around the fact that this is not something that they can see themselves?
I have dealt with that my whole life.
Mhm.
In my home country, we're all Black, but still, because, as I said, it's a demonized, weaponized, stigmatized disease, even though we have
Mhm.
one of the highest patient populations in the world. I was already othered back home, but coming here, it was a new, different type of bias I had never
Hmm.
quite experienced. I was pre-medding undergrad, and I am one of those people that, like, I know my body like the back of my palm. And every time I would try to advocate for myself, I was always met with resistance. I was always met with some kind of bias and judgment in ways that, like, when you're navigating a chronic illness, you don't need anything else, but you can't grasp why you're not seen and believed. And I think that has followed me. It was also another huge reason why I did the transplant was I hated the medical trauma. I hated being not believed. I hated explaining my symptoms to doctors and saying, no, 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 this is acute chest syndrome. I know the difference between pneumonia and acute chest syndrome. And they would be like, well, we're going to do this and then send you home. And I'm like, this is not a send me home situation. Please hear me
Right.
out. Every time I tried to do that. And so I think from a very young age, living with this disease is when you really learn the importance of advocating, but also recognizing when it's time to push and when it's time to back off. But also when it's time to make friends with the other staff so that even when you are met with a provider who seems to be insistent on treating you in the way that he's treated other patients, you have a couple staff who are saying, no, we know this patient, she's hardly ever here. You know what I mean? Like she
Right.
has a full-time job, she has a career. Like for her to be here, her pain intensity is bad. So I've lived with that. And it's very interesting that you asked that question because I still go through it now.
Mhm.
So on 2 occasions
Mhm.
now after my transplant, I've gone in for pain, specifically chest pain. And one, the pain specialist deleted my care plan from the system without speaking to my hematologist and sent me on my way.
Mm-mm.
And it's painful because the assumption is you've had a transplant, so why are you still in my ER?
You're cured.
Precisely. And it's so aggravating because I'm like, it's a curative intent therapy. It is not a finite cure,
Right.
right? And so I think for patients like us, we have a lot of things that are counting against us. The fact that it's an invisible disability counts against us. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but race also
Mhm.
counts against us. And I always say this, like when you see me go into the ER, I never wear sweats
Mhm.
because I'm not looking to do anything that will make you be condescending to me or think that I am less than.
Right.
It's uncomfortable when you're in excruciating pain, having to like put on a blazer and look like you have your life together. A patient shouldn't have to worry about that, but it's just part of what we have to deal with as patients. And so for me, I'm always like, in whatever capacity I can do to change your opinion of me just on a face level, I'm going to do because I would like to be
Mhm.
believed and I would like to be treated in the same way you would want a loved one of yours to be treated kindly and compassionately as well.
Mhm. Yeah, it's awful that that is part of the what you have to do to be hopefully believed and taken seriously. And for those listeners that aren't aware, sickle cell affects African Americans more than other ethnic groups, populations, and Black populations more. It can affect any population. It's just we that's where it happens more. So I think you can't really talk about sickle cell without talking about race, particularly in terms of the United States and how that also factors in to healthcare and working with medical professionals. Are there things that you would want medical providers to learn from this or to take away from this?
I would like to urge a lot of medical providers to see the person and not the diagnosis, right? Because pain is inherently part of the symptoms of sickle cell disease, there is an immediate innate association with pain, you're lying, you're drug seeking. And I think oftentimes if you got to know the person, you might actually feel differently. It's the same way when we even talk about things like racism or bigotry and things like that. Like sometimes you might find out that the person that looks completely opposite from you might be the person that you're actually like-minded with. So for me, with medical providers, I always just say, one, practice compassionate and respectful care. We're not asking you to like us as individuals, but you took an oath to care for people and at least every day show up saying, if I can not add to someone's pain, then I've done my job. I
Mhm.
think oftentimes and I think it happens to the best of us, right? When you encounter patients on a daily basis, and working in the ER is no small feat. We're not negating what they are accomplishing and the work that they're doing. But I think every day it's showing up to the same place and saying, how can I practice a little kindness?
Mhm.
Kindness takes nothing away from you. You don't lose anything by being kind to someone. And so I often just urge providers that better educate yourself about sickle cell disease. And when patients come, give the benefit of the doubt. We all
Mhm.
deserve benefit. We're all not perfect humans. So give benefit of the doubt in treating them. And then it's not your job to label someone and make assumptions that could be detrimental to the patient. It's your job to treat them at their point of need. Whatever happens on the floor is not your responsibility, but while they're in your ER, they are your responsibility. And I think if you let compassion and kindness lead, you will never really lose focus of what's important in kind of hospital settings, which are patients. Like if there are no patients are the ecosystem of they're the nucleus of the health ecosystem. Without patients,
Mhm.
no pharmaceutical companies exist, no biotech companies exist. Doctors and nurses don't have a job.
Right.
And we're all going to be patients at at any point in your life, you are someone's patients. Even providers have doctors. And so I think
Mhm.
if we remember that in kind of thinking about how we treat patients, I think it'll make providers and healthcare practitioners kind of show up a little differently on a day-to-day
Mhm.
basis.
Yeah, I think that's extremely powerful too because I liked what you said. We're person first, not the diagnosis.
Mhm.
And then it is sort of just, how do you want a loved one to be treated should they be in the same situation?
Yeah.
Probably not have their pain plan deleted without their consent or knowledge. And it is one of those things that I always struggle with providers. They're like, "Well, we're busy and we see so many patients." And I was like, it doesn't I don't think it adds any more time to just have kindness, have empathy. Um, and then also just to acknowledge that I think we just had an interview with a mom of a kiddo with a rare disease. The patient, the parent, those are the ones that are the expert in
Yes.
themselves, right? And their condition. Now you have medical expertise, but you have to work together because they live their life day in and day out.
Yeah. And I think it's there needs to be an allyship between patients and providers. Like I love a
Mhm.
provider that is like, I'm looking at your results and I cannot really figure out what's wrong with you. I love a provider that says, I don't know
Right.
or I can't figure that out. Because what that lets me know is you're not claiming to be a jack of all trades. You're limited in what you can read and you need expert guidance or someone else to chime in, right? And I think all
Mhm.
of us want that at the end of the day. We're not looking for, you're not God. You don't know it all. And so for me, sometimes I think when you're navigating a chronic illness or a rare disease, you tend to be drawn to the providers who are okay saying, I don't have an answer for you right now, but I will figure
Mhm.
out a way to get one for you because that shows the vulnerability in you as a provider that even in your white lab coat and with all your accolades, you're still human at the end of the
Mhm.
day.
Right. Right. And being truthful and not necessarily, God forbid, making something up or punting it down the road for another provider to handle. It
Yeah.
is, trying to figure it out, and admitting like, "Okay, there's some more information that I need, and there's some more things that I need to look at." One of the things I wanted to make sure we talked about was Sickle Cell Prodigy. So I know that was, something that you created, and part of it is some of the things we're talking about here, trying to dismantle stigmas, have resources, empower patients and families. So tell us more about Sickle Cell Prodigy.
So Sickle Cell Prodigy has been my baby for 5 years. It all started when a rapper whose name was Prodigy, passed away from complications of sickle cell disease. And so I coined that term because we at the time, the word we use for people that live with sickle cell disease are sickle cell warriors. It's how we like to be called, it's how we like to be addressed. But even in the term warrior, yes, it is someone that fights, but we don't
Mhm.
want direct connotations of like aggressiveness because again, that's how people assume we present. And so I felt like prodigy was a good word because we are doing unconventional things. Before there was work from home, we were working from hospital beds. We were getting our master's degree and our bachelor's from hospital beds. We have had to find unconventional ways to live our life so that we can still achieve our goals. And so that was how the phrase was tagged. And so with Sickle Cell Prodigy, we really started as an advocacy hub for sickle cell warriors globally. And I say that because I would be remiss if I don't highlight that I am an international woman. I always say I'm a global citizen. And so it was important for me to highlight not the work that's just done in the US, but also in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, in the Caribbean. But then I started to notice something very quickly in my advocacy work, which was a lot of organizations were established to and dedicated to helping to care for sickle cell patients or people that have sickle cell traits.
Hmm.
But there was no organization for patients like me who had had these clinical trials and participated in either gene therapy or transplant and needed support because
Mhm.
if you look at cancer, they have stick survivorship programs where they help ease you back, reintegrate you into your life, whether that be your career and things of that nature. Sickle cell, it doesn't exist for us. So what was happening was I was meeting while at conferences or speaking engagement, I was meeting a lot of people who were like, my son just had gene therapy and he's struggling. He doesn't know who
Mm.
he is. He doesn't want to talk to his friends with sickle cell because they think like, well, you're better than us now. You've left us because now you don't have the disease. And it bothered me that there just wasn't a home for patients like me. And so Sickle Cell Prodigy has now evolved into an organization to redefine survivorship. Because I think a lot of clinicians and a lot of the research community, they're focusing on advertising and promoting these newer treatments like gene therapy. But no one is asking the question, how do patients live after the treatment? Even for patients who embark on the treatment, but it doesn't work, what does their life look like? And so for me, I decided, all right, I'm going to chart a path that has not been created yet. I'll make my mistakes along the way, but we need a home. We need a safe
Mhm.
haven where I can sit with my peers and say, yes, we've had these treatments, but we're still struggling.
Right.
And we need resources, right? And so that is how Sickle Cell Prodigy was born. And I'm really proud of it and the work that we're going to do in this space because I think more and more patients, if you go on TikTok, I've seen a lot more patients who, document their journey with these treatments. And then they get to the point where they're like, well, I'm glad I did this, but no one told me that I wouldn't be able to tolerate these foods. No one told me that I'm going to be struggling with depression
Mm.
because I don't know this body. I know sickle cell. It's a part of me. I was born with it. Now I've traded it in and I don't even know what is like I have pain now. I can't categorize. Like a lot of patients are feeling lost. And for me, I think if we can prioritize people that are convicted and when they get back into society help reintegrate them and we can do this for other disease areas, why not sickle cell? Because sickle cell is the blueprint. Now that we've shown it works in sickle cell disease, very quickly gene therapy is going to become accessible to patients with other rare diseases as well. And so if we're going to do it for sickle cell, let's also get it right.
Mhm. No, I think that's beautiful because, like you talked about at the very beginning, about how part of your identity is shaped or a part of sickle cell, right? Like, there's some things that are very much intertwined because you develop those skills or you have those values because you had sickle cell. And so it can be very isolating or lonely to feel like, okay, I've done something that's helping my disease, but then now who am I post this?
Yeah.
And who is my community?
And who's my community? And what about my caregiver?
Mhm.
Like, I'm adjusting to a new identity, but my mom is adjusting to, I've taken care of you your whole life.
Yeah.
What are things that make me happy? I don't remember what makes me happy because I poured all of my love in making sure that like you're safe and you're healthy and you're happy. So it's a balance, and I always say, like, when you have a chronic disease or a rare illness, it doesn't just impact you, it impacts the entire family unit. When you're sick, your loved ones, they might not be in hospital, but they're worried sick about you. And so for me, it was very important to create something that would benefit patients, but it would also best support caregivers as well, because I think they deserve to also figure out their identity on the other side of caring for someone with sickle cell disease.
Mhm, mhm. And I love that you talk about sickle cell prodigy being a blueprint and how these things can be applied to other conditions. Because, like you said, the gene therapy with sickle cell is extremely exciting. We're seeing other conditions that having this available. And I think, again, folks that aren't as familiar may think, oh, okay, again, it's a cure. We've cured it. It's done.
Okay.
And it's like, no, there's a whole host of it's not the end of the sentence. There's a whole, this person's life is continuing, thankfully, and we're glad that we have this, but then there's things that come after to
Yeah.
think about.
Yeah. The aftermath needs to be highlighted. And I think for me, the rude awakening was one of the reasons I wanted to do a transplant, added to the many list of reasons was I no longer wanted to deal with pain. And now, 6 years post, I've had to have a conversation with myself of pain will always be part of my lived experience because I suffered with this disease for 3 decades, and that isn't going to wash away overnight. It's not
Mhm.
a bippity bobbity boo moment. This is real life. And so coming to terms with that took me a long time to not fight myself. Like, I just kept trying to find reasons to explain the pain away. And I was like, okay, well, I'm only 1 year out, so let me give myself grace. And 6 years post, I still have pain. I still have triggers. And I've just come to a place where, like, I still have joy because at least I'm not in the hospital. Like, I'll take
Mhm.
that. It's something I can manage at home. And so the physical and the mental health component are the two things that a lot of patients struggle with, which is the reason
Mhm.
why, like, I'm trying to do everything within my power to provide resources to at least target those two primary areas and help people find their way back to a new version of self.
Is there anything that you think about in terms of the future for, like, sickle cell care or research that make you hopeful or kind of, what do you see as being the next developments happening there?
I can't wait for the day when these treatments are announced for other phenotypes of sickle cell
Mm.
disease. Right now, the priority for most of these clinical trials were patients with hemoglobin SS because it's the most severe. But I think in doing that, we're further putting people in categories. Like, if you have sickle cell disease, whether it's S beta thal, S beta 0, SDSC, you have sickle cell disease. Fine, it might not manifest with frequent crises like HBSS, but those patients still need that level of treatment as well.
Mhm.
And so I'm hopeful that in the next couple of years, we will see that these companies will open up their patient data and patients that will meet the eligibility criteria for, like, gene therapy to those with other phenotypes of sickle cell disease, because I just feel like we shouldn't other any other groups. Like, everyone should be a priority. And so I'm keen to see how in clinical trials these patients with other phenotypes do as well, so that we can say we've developed a treatment that
Mhm.
universally will treat all phenotypes of sickle cell disease. Then I think I would be in a place where I'm hopeful, but also when access becomes readily available across the world. Because right
Mhm.
now, the priority has just been the US, like North America and Europe. In my home country, it's now available in 3 states out of 36. So I'm hopeful that there's progress. I recognize that medical infrastructure needs to be in place for these treatments to be able to get to those types of markets. But I'm hopeful that they'll find cheaper ways to
Mhm.
do these modification of cells and make it readily available.
Mhm. Mhm. And that's an important call out is that there are different we call them genotypes or, like, the genetic pieces, right, that cause sickle cell, but at the end of the day, a lot of what we're seeing is similar, like you said, just because somebody doesn't have hemoglobin SS doesn't mean they don't have the fatigue, the chronic pain, crisis events. Is there anything as we wrap up that you would want someone to take away from this conversation? Like, let's say it's somebody that either has learned they have sickle cell or a caregiver, because I think, that's one of your passions and is very
Yes.
important to you as well. So is there anything that you would say to someone who has sickle cell or to somebody who's providing care to someone with sickle cell?
First thing I'll say is times have changed, right? I was an 80s baby, and then, diagnosing a child from birth wasn't a thing, which is why I was diagnosed so late in life. My mom just remembered me crying a lot as an infant.
Hmm.
And then that was when my pediatric hematologist then tested for sickle cell disease, and it came out positive. But I think because times have changed, there are going to be more drugs on the market. And I want a parent, primarily a parent, to know sickle cell is no longer a death sentence. Sickle cell warriors are no longer dying at age 35, 40. I know a lot of a couple of sickle cell warriors that are well within, 70 and reaching their 80s now. Patients are living longer. And so my goal would be to instill hope in that family that this
Hmm.
diagnosis is not a death sentence, and that they will be able to find ways in partnership with their providers to help that child better manage disease. I have a really good friend of mine now who her daughter was born with sickle cell disease, and through IVF they were able to have another child, and through the umbilical cord were able to do a transplant that way. So now her 6-year-old is now no longer has sickle cell disease, and the beauty of when you have these treatments when you're young is that the body's recovery process is a lot quicker, right? As an adult, it's experienced so much damage. But then when you're a child and you go through these transplant or gene therapy, by the time you're like 12, 13, you have no recollection of ever living with disease. And so I just want parents to remember that, is that you have the capacity now with what's available on the market to transform your child's life, where this becomes a conversation where you have as a family and say, do you remember when? But now things are different for that child growing up because they have no recollection of ever having sickle cell disease. So there.
Thank you so much for saying that and for having this conversation. I really appreciate you talking with us, sharing your story and your insights, and talking about Sickle Cell Prodigy. We'll definitely include a link to that in the show notes.
This was awesome, Kate. Thank you for having me. And to your listeners, thank you for taking the time to listen. I think podcasts are great because it's accessible anywhere. You can do it while you're driving, while you're in the train and things like that. And shows like yours really highlight the importance of like understanding genetic conditions, because I think as a society, we need to love on people. Because I always say, you never know, like people are fighting invisible battles you know nothing about. And so shows like yours really highlight different patient perspective and caregiver stories. And I think whether you realize it or not, you are trickling, there's impact in everything that you're doing. And I'm just so grateful that you extended an invitation for me to even be a guest on your show. So thank you so, 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 so much.
For more information about this episode, visit allaccessdna.podbean.com, where you can also stream all episodes of the show. This link is also in the show notes for easy access. Any inquiries on the podcast can be sent to allaccessdna@gmail.com. Check out our Patreon at patreon.com/allaccessdna and consider donating to get bonus content, submit questions for our guests, and connect with other genetic curious individuals. Note that this podcast is for entertainment and education and is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice. Please consult your physician with any questions you may have regarding your health. Please rate and review the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. This helps other people like you discover the show. All Access DNA is hosted, produced, and edited by Kate Wilson. The logo design is by Designs by NKJ. Thanks for listening, and join us next time.